Granddaughter thankful grandfather was brought home from war after losing 5 siblings. When the Smith family waved goodbye to 6 of their sons who went off to fight in World War I, they feared they'd never see them again. For 5 of their sons, that was the harsh reality. These events closely resemble those of Steven Spielberg's WW2 epic Saving Private Ryan, though they happened 70 years before the film during World War I. The Smith family. Margaret and John Smith's 2 years of hell began in September 1916, when their 22-year-old son Robert was killed in the Battle of Flers-Courcelette on the Somme. Robert died just 11 weeks after arriving in France, and he'd been among 100 men who had wrongly been told the Germans were retreating from their position. World War I. Margaret, a mill worker, and her husband John, a chimney sweep, had 11 children, with 6 being sent away to fight in World War I. She feared that they'd never return, saying to a news station, "Don't have boys, they'll only end up as cannon fodder," as reported by The Sun. Robert Smith. Robert lost his life on the morning of September 16, 1916, when he was hit by enemy machine gun fire. He was then taken to a casualty station, where at first he and his older brother George, 26, who was in the same battalion, joked together. But 3 days later, Robert died from his wounds. 4 brothers. After his death, 4 brothers, John, George, Frederick, and Alfred, came home on leave and posed for a photo, which wound up being their last one together. The 6th son, Wilfred, was not in the photo because he wasn't called up at the time. George Smith. On Bonfire Night, 1916, George lost his life when he was shot through the head by a sniper as he walked down waist-deep mud. His body disappeared under the surface, only to be lost forever. Then Frederick, 21, was wounded on Christmas Eve 1916, and he was sent home to recover, where he remained until February 1917. Third Battle of Ypres. The following week, Wilfred joined his brothers, and 5 months later, on the opening day of the Third Battle of Ypres, Frederick was killed. Frederick has no grave, but his name is shown on the Menin Gates in Ypres. Then there was the 4th brother, John Stout, age 37, who was married with 2 daughters. The nightmare continues. He was killed in the war on October 9, 1917, and his body was never found. The nightmare only continued the following summer when their 5th son, Alfred, age 30, was wounded in a battle on the Ardra River. He died of his wounds at a military hospital on July 22, 1918. Margaret's heartache. Just 3 weeks later, Queen Mary received a letter begging her to end Margaret Smith's heartache and bring her last son, Wilfred, home. By that time, Wilfred was 20 years old, and he'd fought the Germans in the trenches of Ypres. Black-edged telegrams. Margaret couldn't handle receiving one more telegram after receiving 5 black-edged telegrams from the War Office, each one confirming that one of her boys had died. 3 of her sons were never found, and to this day their bodies still lie under the fields of northern France and Flanders. Queen Mary. Then in August 1917, Queen Mary, the wife of King George V, read Margaret's horrible story in a letter sent to Buckingham Palace. She vowed in the moment that Wilfred would be returned home safe to his mother from the front line of war. Wilfred Smith. To Margaret's surprise, a few days later, the Queen's private secretary, Edward Wallington, wrote back to her saying Her Majesty had contacted the War Office to find Private Smith in the trenches and order him home. During his time at war, Wilfred survived mustard gas attacks and was training for the final round of combat with enemy soldiers. Returning home. It was then that a messenger arrived to the French-Belgian border of Chertigam with orders from Army headquarters for Wilfred to pack his bag and go home. Military historian John Sheen, an expert on the Durham Light Infantry, said, "Mrs. Smith's story must have touched the Queen's heart because taking a man from the line for personal reasons is extremely rare, as reported by The Sun." suffering after the war. After Queen Mary sent Wilfrid home to Barnard Castle, he became a stonemason and chimney sweep, like his father John, who died in 1918. Throughout the remainder of his life, Wilfrid suffered chronic chest problems from the mustard gas attack, and he lived until he was 69 years old, having raised 5 children with his wife Hannah. Barnard Castle. Wilfrid's granddaughter, Amanda, age 52, said, "As children, we knew a little about Wilfrid's amazing story. My mom would tell us some of it, but Granddad did not really talk about it. I think it was probably hard for him in some ways, as he was lucky to leave the war behind, though the people in Barnard Castle didn't see it that way." Memorial. Few people can imagine what it must have been like for him to lose 5 brothers, Amanda added. On a Sunday in November 2018, Wilfrid's daughter, Diane, age 74, along with Amanda and her daughter, Charlene, age 30, son Craig, 28, and grandson Tommy, age 2, planted poppy crosses at Barnard Castle's War Memorial. Mary Burcham. It's there that the names of the 5 brothers are remembered. Anna recalls that Wilfrid was brought home in the first place thanks to a woman named Mary Burcham, who befriended Margaret at the time of the war. It was Burcham who took the brave step of writing Queen Mary and begging her to save Margaret from any further sadness by bringing Wilfrid home. Saving Private Smith. Anna said, "We owe a lot to Mrs. Burcham because without her, none of us would be here. Wilfrid was sent home to keep the family name alive, and he was able to live a long life because of that." With the help of historians, the Sun has pieced together this story of Saving Private Smith. Saving Private Ryan. While much of the 1998 movie Saving Private Ryan was inspired by fiction, the premise behind Captain Miller's mission is based on a true story. It covers the story of the Nyland brothers, Preston, Edward, Robert, and Frederick from Tonawanda, New York, serving in World War II. Similar stories. When the War Department learned that 3 of the 4 brothers had perished, they decided that the remaining brother needed to be brought home, just like it was portrayed in the film, and for the Smith family. The only difference is the Smith brothers served in World War I. Nyland family. The 4th Nyland brother, Frederick, was ordered home in the U.S. in 1944. But something unexpected happened in May 1945 when the Nylands received news that Edward was found alive in camp when it was liberated by British forces. The other 2 Nyland brothers, Preston and Robert, were buried side by side in the American cemetery at Colville-sur-Mer. Check out these other videos from Let Me Know. If you haven't made the move to subscribe to our channel, all you need to do is click on that red subscribe button. Thank you for watching.